Given the challenges to freedom of speech presented by the, now I'm not allowed to talk about this, the legal assault on Andrew, we rather hoped, the IPA and its board rather hoped, that those self-appointed freedom of speech defenders such as Julian Burnside QC, Professor Robert Mann, distinguished author David Marr, would have been prominent in the defence of free speech and Andrew. No such luck. But I would in particular like to read one apology. This is from the former Prime Minister, John Howard. I am sorry that I cannot be with you tonight, as I am in the United States. I particularly admire the strong stand taken by Andrew Bolt in defence of free speech. Political correctness seeks to stifle people such as Andrew.
There was one apology that Rod allowed me to provide now, which is from Tony Abbott. As a former journalist and now as a politician who has occasionally found himself on the wrong side of the zeitgeist, I can attest to the importance of being able to speak one's mind freely without fear of formal censure. An unyielding belief in freedom of speech is a fundamental tenet of the Western liberal tradition and underpins our democratic process. As Sir Robert Menzies said in 1942, the whole essence of freedom is that it is freedom for others as well as for ourselves. Freedom for people to disagree with us and to agree. Freedom for minorities as well as for majorities. The more primitive the community, the less freedom of thought and expression it is likely to concede. I applaud the Institute of Public Affairs and Andrew Bolt for its robust defence of free speech in Australia. The IPA's interest in freedom of speech is long-standing and obvious. Our views on individual freedom of choice, for example, have not always been popular. Recently, as many of you would know, there have been calls for the IPA to be silenced because of our views on climate change. So it is a pleasure to host tonight's event.
I must say that I am, as I'm sure we all are, deeply inspired by Andrew Bolt's courage and his passion, his purpose and his honour. A man with an authentic intellect, a fine, uncluttered mind, a man of relentless energy, a proud Australian with much to be proud about. It was Hemingway who described guts as being grace under pressure. Andrew Bolt has guts. In so many ways, Andrew Bolt speaks for those that have no voice. He speaks for the quiet people who think, but who also work. Let us hope that Andrew Bolt continues his campaigns on so many issues of interest to ordinary Australians, so that in the decades ahead we can look back and say of his glorious career that he changed Australia and changed the way Australians viewed their country. Thank you.
I'm here because I believe in democracy and I believe in freedom and I believe in liberty. I don't believe in Andrew Bolt, but I believe in his right to be Andrew Bolt. But I am concerned that people in some of the circles I mix with on my side of politics increasingly seem to think that they should write or invoke or resurrect laws which will shut Andrew Bolt up. A democracy is, at the very least, a free marketplace of ideas and a free marketplace of arguments against those ideas. But it is never, never a stifling or a suffocation of ideas. I have to own up to personally liking Andrew Bolt. I have done media battle with him plenty of times, and I know there is real decency there. Decency which I'll be proud to attest to in any court. So I am sorry, and indeed I'm outraged to see him now dragged through the courts for possibly breaching, if he did, a law that probably should not be there. stretching out its fingers into the realm of what Orwell might have called a thought crime, because he impertinently asked the wrong questions when all the right answers had been handed down from high above in tablets of stone long ago. This is not a cast of mind that I applaud.
I regard Andrew Bolt as one of the very greatest journalists that Australia has produced for many, many years, and I have no doubt that he is going to go down in Australian history as one of our greatest journalists. In my view, it is entirely clear that the law does stifle free speech, and it does so because it prohibits people from saying things that they ought to be able to say in perfect freedom without the authority of the state being triggered or aroused in this way. Freedom of speech has clearly been abridged when a person may be hauled before a tribunal of public servants or a court because of things that have been said or written in the media, and when orders may be issued which prevent them repeating these things or continuing with their publication, and even requiring them to apologise for what they've said. To enable a person who claims to be insulted by what someone else has said to enlist the full panoply of state power against one who has offended them is truly grotesque. And it's this grotesqueness that places me on this platform tonight. To suggest that we need public servants or courts to invite us to reflect on what we say and even to recant and apologise is a reversion to the techniques of the medieval church, with all the threat that that implies. The processes of this law I find obscene in the full meaning of the word: offensive, loathsome, ill-omened, disgusting. That is why we are here tonight. The law which has made this event possible must be abolished without delay.
The fight for free speech and liberty to speak on important public issues, it's not a 100-meter dash, it's a marathon. As the American former President Andrew Jackson put it, and I'm sure you've heard this before, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Thomas Paine put it slightly differently. He said, to reap the blessings of freedom, you must undergo the fatigue of supporting it. The only sort of free speech that matters is the sort that offends some people somewhere. If everyone is sitting around agreeing with each other, there's harmony, you're sitting in circles, a guy's got a guitar playing Kumbaya, the concept of free speech is meaningless. It doesn't do anything. Or if it does do anything, I don't know what it is. Being free and at liberty to say and do what everyone else wants you to say and do is something you will never have to fight for. It doesn't make any difference to anything. So the only sort of freedom of speech or liberty that, is going to do anything is the kind that's going to offend people. Of course, the threat here in the West today when it comes to freedom of speech is not some sort of Soviet-style secret police or ruthless dictatorship. It comes from turf-protecting bureaucrats who find themselves all of a sudden in the human rights scheme. It comes from people who want to create a right not to be offended. Or actually, it's not quite a right not to be offended, because it's almost always a right not to be offended about things that matter to them. Because all sorts of the people who really like this legislation, the kind that's being used against Andrew, they would be horrified if someone said, well, what about, people who are offended by burning the American flag? Do you think they ought to be able to litigate against the flag burners? And of course, they'd be horrified at that thought. So what the supporters of this legislation really want is they want a right not to be offended by the sorts of things that the sort of Chardonnay-sipping progressive elite think we ought to be offended about, nothing else.
Why is this happening? Because in some of the oldest free societies on the planet, we've entirely corrupted the concept of human rights. It's not very difficult. Human rights are rights for humans, rights for individuals. Back in 1215, Magna Carta Libertatum, to give it its full title, couldn't have made it plainer. Real human rights are restraints that the people place upon the king. We understood that 8 centuries ago. Today, we've entirely perverted and corrupted the principle. We're undermining real human rights like freedom of speech and replacing them with ersatz rights that, rather than restraining the king, give him vastly increased state power to restrain the rights of his subjects. It's an abomination, and it's explicitly Orwellian, because these new rights are not handed out equally, but in different ways and to different degrees according to which approved identity groups you fall into. One of the great strengths of common law has been its general antipathy toward group rights, because the ultimate minority is the individual. The minute you have collective rights, you require dramatically enhanced state power to mediate the hierarchy of different victim groups. It's not only expensive, it's preposterous. I don't want the state regulating a hierarchy of phobias between different interest groups. The lights are going out on core Western liberties, one light at a time, one cartoonist at a time, one novelist at a time, one filmmaker at a time, and one newspaper columnist at a time. So I stand with Andrew Bolt because he represents the most beleaguered identity group in the Western world today, a freeborn citizen asserting his right to the most basic liberties of all. As they say here, live free or die. Go, Andrew!
Thank you. I went through a time that I thought was really, really difficult. And I had no idea that one of the worst moments would be this one. In that I'm not used to having my praises sung. I've actually built my career on thinking they'll hate me anyway, so I'm free to say what I think. So now that I realise I've got people's good opinions to lose, it puts the pressure on. When I told my lawyers I'd been asked to speak here, after we revived them, I've been given what I've never actually taken to a podium before. Normally, if I have notes, they're speaking notes. I have here my don't speak notes. The list of things I must not speak about include the trial itself, the evidence given, the feelings I had in having one of my best jokes in the column explained 4 times to the court, with everyone being very po-faced and what is this kind of to see a joke steamrolled like that. The only consolation was to see 4 times the clerk of courts giggling and trying to suppress it. I thought that was a pretty good line, that he could laugh at it 4 times. But to have someone say, "What do you mean by this joke?" Humour doesn't survive, and nor does... I've already breached these non-speaking notes. Do not speak about the evidence. Do not give any impression of trying to influence the judge. On the other hand, do not give any suggestion that the judge could be influenced, on the other hand. And indeed, I am sure that the judge is not influenced by anything I will say. I have no criticism to make of him. But look, I want to thank all of you who came here tonight. I tell you what, there's one thing that makes you think maybe I'm not that crazy after all, and that is that good people come in support and respond. I see people here that I've admired for a long time, have been with me for a long time, helping me out in my early career. And I'm so grateful to you. But also, I'm so grateful that so many people are prepared to come here about something as simple as speaking your mind, and maybe you've witnessed tonight me speaking it too freely. We shall see if I'm punished just for what I've said right here. That's the country you're living in. Thank you so much from the heart.
Andrew, I know you're very much opposed to awards for journalists. In fact, the emptiest cupboard in your room is your journalistic awards. So we wrestled with this. The IPA wrestled with the wording that, of the little tribute we should give you this evening. And so we didn't really put the media in there because we know your feelings on this, but we're going to give a little memento to be put on the mantelpiece, and I'm sorry, Paul Howes, your name appears on it. So I'm sure John Roscombe got prior approval for that, but it says this. This is from the Institute of Public Affairs. In recognition of your courage, commitment and conviction in the pursuit of liberty in Australia, presented to Andrew Bolt by the Institute of Public Affairs, Melbourne, 20th of June 2011 on the occasion of freedom of speech in Australia, Michael Kroger, Paul Howes, David Kemp, James Allan and Mark Steyn. So,